All right, let's dive into the programming language that quietly powered the rise of some of the biggest websites you use every single day. If you've ever wanted to know how to build powerful web applications and do it quickly, you are in exactly the right place. We're about to take a step-by-step tour of Ruby.
So, ever wonder what giants like GitHub, Shopify, and Airbnb all have in common? Well, especially in their early explosive growth phases, they all bet on the same language. The answer, of course, is Ruby, a language designed from the ground up for one thing: programmer happiness and productivity.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big picture, where Ruby even came from. Then we'll get our hands dirty with the basic building blocks, learn how to make our programs smart with logic, and keep our code clean and reusable. And finally, we'll unlock Ruby's most powerful idea, its object-oriented core, before we wrap it all up with a handy cheat sheet of the essentials. To really get what Ruby is all about, we have to go back in time a little. We're going to see how a language from the 90s, built on a really simple idea, suddenly became this absolute powerhouse for the modern web, all thanks to one game-changing innovation. So, Ruby was created way back in 1993 by Yukihiro Matsumoto, who everyone just calls Mats. His goal was to create a language that felt natural, easy to read and write. He mixed the simplicity of languages like Python with the pure object-oriented style of Smalltalk. The whole mission? To make programmers happy. For about a decade, Ruby was this well-loved but kind of niche language. Then, in 2005, everything changed. A developer named David Heinemeier Hansen released something called Ruby on Rails. It was a web framework that let people build these huge, complex, database-driven websites in a tiny fraction of the time it used to take. And that was the spark. It led to this explosion of startups building on Rails. The secret sauce behind Rails is this thing called the Model View Controller Pattern, or MVC. It's a really smart way to organize your code by separating its jobs. The model handles all the data. The view is what the user actually sees. And the controller? It's like the traffic cop directing everything between the other two. This separation makes your code so much easier to manage as it grows. Okay, so we've seen the big picture. Now let's zoom in and get our hands dirty with the language itself. To build anything, we first have to know how Ruby handles information. So let's look at those basic building blocks: variables, constants, and the core data types you'll be using all the time. In Ruby, things are pretty straightforward. A variable just starts with a lowercase letter. If you pop a $sign in front, it becomes a global variable, which means it's accessible everywhere. And if you use all caps, you're making a constant. Now, here's a funny thing. You can technically change a constant's value, but Ruby will shout at you with a warning because it goes against the rules. If you take away one thing from this, let it be this. In Ruby, everything is an object. A piece of text, a number, even nil, which just means nothing, isn't just a dead value. It's a living object with built-in abilities. The main types you work with are strings for text, numbers, booleans, arrays for lists, and hashes for key value pairs. And we'll get to symbols in just a bit. And because everything's an object, even a simple string comes with all these useful methods built right in. You don't need to import some special library to do basic stuff. You can just call .upcase to make it all caps, .reverse to flip it around, or use .include with a question mark to check if it contains something, and that'll return true or false. It's so convenient. Okay, so we know how to store data. Now let's give our programs a brain. We're going to look at how to make decisions with conditional statements and how to do repetitive tasks without, repeating ourselves, using loops. Conditionals in Ruby are designed to be super readable. You've got your standard if and else. But here is the first classic trip up for beginners. It's else if. ELSIF, not else if. And just as important, every if block and pretty much every other structure in Ruby has to be closed with the end keyword. Trust me, forgetting that is a rite of passage for every new Ruby developer. When it comes to looping based on a condition, Ruby gives you a couple of cool options. A while loop runs as long as its condition is true. Simple enough. An until loop is the exact opposite. It runs as long as its condition is false. They're really just two sides of the same coin, and it adds to that English-like feel of the language. Now, here's a big one. While you can write a classic for loop in Ruby, you almost never see it in modern code. The preferred way, the idiomatic way, which means how the pros do it, is to use the .each method. See, since an array is an object, you can just call .each on it and give it a little block of code to run for every single item inside. It's so much cleaner and really drives home that object-oriented thinking. A core principle of good coding is don't repeat yourself, or DRY. So this next part is all about how Ruby helps us do just that by bundling up our code into reusable chunks. We'll cover methods, the code blocks you can pass around, and this super important idea of symbols. So, methods in Ruby are just reusable blocks of code defined with def and end, but they have this really elegant feature called implicit return. What that means is you almost never have to actually write the word return. The method just automatically sends back the value of the very last line it runs, which helps keep your code super clean and concise. Okay, now this is a really interesting and important distinction. Strings versus symbols. A string is for data, for text, that might need to change. Every single time you write admin in your code, Ruby creates a brand new object in memory. But a symbol, which starts with a colon like admin, is an unchangeable identifier. No matter how many times you write admin, it's always pointing to the exact same object in memory. This makes it way more efficient, which is why it's the standard for things like hash keys. So, we've been saying everything is an object this whole time. Well, now we're going to pull back the curtain and see how it all works. We're going to learn how to create our own custom object blueprints using something called classes. And this analogy just nails it. A class is the set of instructions. It defines what a user is supposed to be, what properties it has, and what it can do. The object, or the instance, is the actual thing you create from that blueprint, like a specific user with their own name and email. Building a class breaks down into about 4 steps. First, you define the blueprint with the class and end keywords. Second, you can use this nifty shortcut @your_accessor to define its properties. Third, you create a special initialize method. That's the constructor that runs whenever you create a new object. And finally, you defined all its behaviors as instance methods. Once that blueprint exists, creating an actual object is super easy. You just call .new on the class name and pass in whatever arguments your initialize method needs. And boom, user1 is now its own unique object, an instance of that user class, and you can call all the methods you defined on it, like .greet. Ruby gives you 2 really powerful ways to share code between your classes. First is inheritance, which is for is-a relationships. So an admin is a special type of employee. The other way is with modules, which are more for has-a relationships. Think of them like little backpacks of abilities you can mix in. A class doesn't have to be a printer to get printing abilities. It can just include the printable module. Whew! All right, we've covered a ton of ground. Let's boil it all down to a final cheat sheet. These are the absolute most important principles you need to remember to write clean, effective Ruby code. All right, let's lock these in. Remember, everything is an object. Methods have that sweet implicit return. Always, always close your blocks with end. Use symbols for your hash keys. It's way more performant. The keyword is else if, not else if. The best way to loop is with .each. And never forget, it was Ruby on Rails that took all these great ideas and used them to completely change web development. And there you have it. We've gone from the big picture philosophy right down to the syntax for creating your very own objects. The principles of Ruby, simplicity, productivity, programmer happiness, they're all there to help you build amazing things. So the only real question left is, what are you going to build first?